And good morning. Hopefully everybody can hear me all right. Let's see. We've got one of our cameras back there is acting all kind of is really goofy at this point. This is Getting Schooled. I'm meteorologist Ross Sellett. Glad to be here once again, and we'll give it about another minute or so for some folks to come in, and I'll get logged in here on this other computer, get some of those comments going here. But today we're going to be talking all about regional weather as we have been this week. Yesterday was all about the Great Lakes. Today, the Arizona Monsoon, or it's also called the North American Monsoon. We'll talk about the regional patterns and how mountains kind of influence things. And then tomorrow we'll talk a lot more about mountain weather. And today is a topic that I'm certainly very excited about because it's totally different than what we've got here in the Great Lakes region. And it's really interesting how it all comes together. So we'll get to that here coming up here in just a few more seconds. Let me just get logged in here on the other screen. Let me know if the audio is working. Looks like the computer is just being a little on the slow side here. Let's try to log that in one more time. So again, this is Getting Schooled. It does look like things are working all right here. So yesterday, Great Lakes weather. Today, we'll talk all about the Arizona Monsoon. And tomorrow, mountain weather. And if you haven't done so already, let me know where you're watching from today. It's kind of interesting to kind of see the variety of responses and locations, whether it's Toledo, whether it's other spots in Northwest Ohio, Southeast Michigan. And we've had more friends started to show up in different parts of the country as well. So it's always a lot of fun there. And let's go right over to what we're looking at. I want to describe basically where the part of the country that we're talking about and where we're at here. So for the Arizona Monsoon, it's not just Arizona, although Arizona is probably the largest state impacted. It's also Southern California. It is Nevada. It's Utah, Colorado, New Mexico. In fact, really the whole western part of the country can be influenced somewhat by this. But what ends up happening, as we all know, is it gets hot out in the desert southwest. There are certainly parts there in the desert where it is a sizzling location. And this is about the time of the year that happens. So this is late April. There's already some reports now of Vegas and Phoenix getting up into the 90s, close to 100 degrees. So it's already getting really hot there. Now, May and June are particularly hot. Not as much July and August. It's hot out there a lot all the way during the summertime, as you can probably imagine. It's a little bit different. So the setup here during the late May in particular, and certainly June, as you get this big area of high pressure right here. We talked about areas of low pressure and high pressure and what they mean, but usually high pressure brings in sunny weather. It's fair conditions. The air is kind of moving away from the high pressure, and it does bring in lots of sunshine, lots of heat, and all the air kind of flows around that area of high pressure. So the winds are very important when you come out to parts of the desert here, because the reason it is so dry is that those winds, well, they're coming right over the ocean. They pick up all that moisture, and then they hit these big mountains out here in California, and they lose all that moisture. And so after those winds go up and it produces the rain out into the mountainous areas, it basically, imagine taking a sponge and just wringing out all of that water that's in it, and there's nothing left. That's essentially what's happening with more of that southwest or that westerly flow right through the desert areas. Is it's high, it's dry, there's just not a whole lot of moisture at all to work with, and that's why they just don't get a whole lot of rain. Without the rain, it heats up even more, it gets hotter, it gets drier. It's a pattern that just keeps repeating until it breaks, and this area of high pressure becomes so big that it starts to move so far north that the winds no longer come out of that same direction anymore, and everything changes, which is what we're certainly looking at here for us as well. So let me clear this. We'll take you over to the next graphic. Now, this is what happens as we get into July, August, and September. It's the monsoon setup here, and monsoon does not mean rain. It means a wind change, and it's so important. It's a seasonal wind change. It's usually a wind change that brings in extra moisture that leads to rain, but monsoon itself, everybody thinks it's rainfall, and lots of it. Actually, the word monsoon has to do with the winds changing direction. In this case, that area of high pressure, instead of being located down here into southern parts of Arizona or central Arizona, it moves northwards here right over the Four Corners. Sometimes it gets into Utah, it's in Colorado, sometimes it'll be out towards Nevada, but it goes far enough to the north here to where the winds begin to shift, and it's more out of the east and even the southeast, which helps to draw in some more of this moisture here. And then an area of low pressure, really hot air, develops down towards really into the southwest corner of Arizona, parts of California. My goodness, Death Valley's out there. They routinely are 110, 120 degrees in the summertime. And so that heat helps to kind of fuel these winds coming in two locations. It pulls in moisture right off of the area here near Baja California, the Gulf of California. It also pulls in moisture right off of towards the Gulf of Mexico. And so it's helping to pull and draw in that moisture. So let me get rid of all the drawings that I've put on here to kind of show you a little bit better detail what these winds are doing here. So those winds help you to create that moisture, helps to lead to more humidity. It's already hot out there, and that helps to fuel some of those storms. But those winds are driving right into the mountains at the same time. And when air goes into the mountains, as I've kind of shown this many times, you got the air that comes in, it hits the mountains, it's forced to go up. And when that air goes up, it helps to create those clouds, helps to create showers and thunderstorms when it's out there. So it's really a great setup for quite a bit of rainfall that they get during July, August, and September. Because of the rain, that actually cools things down slightly. So the hottest temperatures typically happen in June or early July out in the desert Southwest instead of late July, August, or September. So usually when we've got our hottest weather here, the desert is a little bit cooler compared to their hottest weather, but June can be an absolutely brutal month. So a lot of times they look forward to some of that storm activity. It fires up. But here's kind of an inside look here into that monsoon thunderstorm that's developing, and they happen near the mountains first. That's where they fire up because they got winds coming from different directions. They hit the mountains and they go straight up, and it causes those thunderstorms there first. And then as they continue to build, we all know sometimes we've felt these storms as they've build up and then they release that rainfall. The air gets a little bit colder. Well, that pocket of cold air almost acts like a miniature cold front, and that kind of pours down. That hits the hot air somewhere else, and it allows more storms to fire up. And this happens all the time out there in the monsoon areas, day after day after day. It starts in the mountains, and then these little pockets of cool air kind of move off the mountains, and then another storm will blow up. That storm will go through its life cycle. It'll die out, but that pocket of cool air moves again. Another cloud goes up, and this just keeps happening over and over and over again. But the storms will happen first right there along the mountains here, as you can see in the background. So here's Phoenix. We're pointing at Phoenix. Phoenix is in the desert. They're in the lower elevations. It's hot. It is dry. There's cacti all over the place. But up here in the mountains, it's a little bit cooler there. These storms fire up there first, and then they sort of move their way down the mountainside after that, as what we're looking at. So it's a really neat setup, but it all is driven by the change in what we're looking at with the wind direction that's out towards the southwest, which has a big impact on everything when it comes to these storms. So we talked, I think I may have even shown this graphic several weeks ago if you're watching, but the other thing that makes some of these storms unique out into parts of the desert Southwest is that these are thunderstorms that are elevated in nature, meaning the cloud bases of the storms are much higher off the ground. And that means a couple things. For us, if we get it, usually it means the thunder is quite loud because there's a little bit of warm air aloft usually for us, and that will send down kind of the sound waves kind of hit that and bounce off and head straight down to the ground. Usually the tornado risk is a little bit lower. But the other thing that happens out there with those storms is that because the cloud base is so much higher, it's about 5 times higher than what we have here in Ohio. That also means that we can see 5 times more of the lightning strike when it happens. And so they can get some very dramatic, vivid lightning storms out there in the desert Southwest. The desert, out of all places, that's where you can find some of the most interesting and vivid lightning storms. And the reason is 2 reasons. One, the storm elevation is much higher. The other, there's so much dry air usually surrounding these thunderstorms that you don't have the extra rain, don't have the extra humidity to kind of block some of the light. A lot of times here we get kind of that strobe effect. We get a powerful thunderstorm to come in. There's so much rain involved that we get these like flashes of lightning. And it kind of looks like a pulse, like a flash that's just going off. When you get out towards areas that have more dry air surrounding it, you can actually see the bolt and all the fingers of electricity that kind of come off of that bolt before it hits the ground. And that's why things are much more vivid out towards the southwest. Sometimes we would call an elevated thunderstorm cloud being 2,000 feet above the ground out there. It can be 5,000 feet off the ground, much higher up. But this is, again, a look at some of the lightning that happens out of the clouds. Cloud to ground is really common. You get a lot of cloud-to-cloud lightning. There's a lot of different types of lightning that happens within a thunderstorm cloud. But a lot of times to us, if there's a lot of heavy rain involved, it all looks the same. It's just kind of a flash here or there and everywhere, but we can't see the details of all those lightning strikes a lot of times when they end up happening here for us. Let me go over, I want to show you a little bit more on the monsoon. So I'm going to go back over to the other computer that we've got here. And again, I can't stress this enough, because you're going to hear this. You get into a big rainstorm, and I hear it all the time. You hear, whoa, look at that monsoon outside. It's a crazy monsoon. And it sounds good, and everybody likes to refer to a heavy rainstorm as a monsoon. The only problem with that is it doesn't really make sense, because a monsoon doesn't have really as much to do with rain as it has to do with the seasonal wind shift. So a monsoon is the name for a seasonal wind here that develops. It was first applied to the Arabian Sea, which blow for 6 months from the northeast, and then for 6 months the winds shift out of the southwest. And the most dramatic monsoon in the world is not in Arizona, it's in India. They get a ton of rain during their rainy season that has to do with the monsoon. The winds shift, it brings in all that warm, humid air, and it leads to constant rain for months on end. And then it goes back to kind of the original prevailing wind, and they don't have hardly any rainfall generally during their drier season. So when you hear about a wet season and dry season, not always, but a lot of times it is driven by a wind shift somewhere in the globe. So over in India, it's the most common one. The one that we have here in the United States is in the desert Southwest. And it's a little different than what they have in India, but again, it's all driven by the same thing. Monsoon storm threat. So what makes it interesting? Well, we're talking about Arizona in particular. To me, one of the most fascinating things is the intense lightning that happens. And not only is it intense, but also it comes with a lot of different varieties that you see in the sky. This lightning picture that's in the background, this is out towards Tucson, Arizona. This is a picture, I think it was 2014, so it's been 6 years. It'll be 6 years coming up in late July. And this very dramatic lightning, this is one flash of lightning. Well, it seemed to be one flash. It all kind of happened in an instant. And you can see bolts filling two distinct bolts here. Well, almost three, really, if you look over here. And then it's kind of filling the whole sky up. And it was like that strike after strike after strike. It was such a dramatic storm to witness. Unbelievable to see that. Now, not only is it intense lightning, but also dust storms happen, because you get the winds that will develop out of these storms, and they just get so little rainfall in parts of the desert Southwest that they might get about the same amount of rain that we may get, say, for the month of August or something like that, but then they're not really getting rain the majority of the year. So most of the rain happens during this monsoon season. So when those winds develop, they can pick up the dust and really carry it along. So I'm going to talk more about that coming up. Flash floods, though, that may be the biggest danger. In fact, not maybe, it is the biggest danger out towards Arizona, New Mexico in particular. Even Nevada and southern Utah is definitely in line for that. And sometimes they can have classic severe weather. Arizona averages 4 tornadoes in a given year. Arizona is a very large state. It's bigger than Ohio. Ohio averages about 18 tornadoes in a given year. So it's not that many, but they still do occasionally get a tornado or two that develops out that way. So let's go ahead and take a look at these storm threats more in detail. Intense lightning, you get extremely high heat out there in the desert, and you get really high cloud bases. That means you have a lot of power and you have a lot of room to see stuff. And if you've ever been out to the desert, you know there's not a whole lot of trees blocking your view. There might be a cactus here or there, and some trees occasionally, depending on what elevation you're at. But these big open scenes that you have out there leads to some amazing lightning displays that takes place here for us. So that is really kind of the formula. It's high heat, you get some humidity, some moisture, enough to kind of trigger everything, and that leads to those high cloud bases, and then you get some intense lightning that comes along with it, which is really incredible stuff. The other dust storms, sandy or dry soil plus high thunderstorm winds, and it leads to a blinding wall of dust. And there's a very specific term for this. It's called a haboob, H-A-B-O-O-B. This is the picture of it, of one taking place, and you can see this wall of dust coming straight out of that cloud. So here's our thunderstorm cloud here that's taking place. You've got the winds coming down, and look at all of that dirt here that's just being picked up, and it's just taking that, and all of a sudden, once that wall of sand hits you, it's just like a blinding wall of dust, and you can't see anything at all. And you got to pull over off the side of the road, as I did here in this picture. And then you just got this wall of dust coming right at you with some strong winds. And they can get much more dramatic than this. I've actually got a video here to show you coming up of one that took place in Phoenix. Actually, it might be two in that Phoenix area. Pretty incredible stuff. Now, I mentioned how they'll get a lot of rain, kind of like what we'll get for the month of August, but they're getting it all in one shot. This is July, August, and September precipitation here on the one side. And you can see how the rainfall is pretty high from the monsoon here in Arizona. This is New Mexico. And then Utah and Colorado are also impacted by that. You go down to Mexico, the same process, the same wind change here produces tons of rainfall in that area. But on the graph over to the corner here, you can see how it compares with what they typically get in a given year. So here it is. Basically, we follow this curve. I'll sum it up real easy for you. Not much rain, basically no rain, hardly any rain, a little bit of rain. Look out. They get quite a bit here in this short period of time, and then it goes back down. So our monsoon season is, well, technically it starts in June. And so it is basically all of this right here. So let me go back over to a different color and highlight it a little bit better. But let me get rid of that. So this is our monsoon season right here. They get quite a bit of rainfall. And you know what? It's really important to not only the plants out there, it greens things up, but it's important to all the different animals, whether it be snakes or mice and rabbits. And there's all kinds of animals, small animals depending on that, bugs and insects. Everything is really depending on, they go long periods of time without getting any rainfall. So when they get it, they depend on it to stock up on it, and it really leads to quite a bit of life, and they depend on that rainfall quite a bit. Severe storms, damaging winds, small hail. Again, I already mentioned this, but Arizona gets about 4 tornadoes on average every single year. So there's usually not a whole lot with it, but this is out in, this picture here is out in New Mexico. No tornado with it, but it was a wall cloud, so that whole area was spinning around, and if conditions were a little more right, it could have led to a funnel cloud or a tornado with it. So it doesn't happen that often, but it does happen occasionally if the conditions are right out in parts of Arizona and New Mexico. So that is certainly the big thing that we typically look for. Oh, I know what I want. I want to show you these video clips. That's some of the best parts here. So let's go over. All right, let's start with this one right here. This goes back to that giant dust storm that's rolling right out of the cloud. So this is kind of putting it all in motion, some time-lapse video here. And you can see that wall of dust as it approaches. There goes an airplane. Probably good the airplane got in when it did. So again, there you see the term haboob. So it's a different word altogether that we're not used to at all in this part of the country. But it is a normal weather word out in Arizona that gets used all the time for these dust storms. And then once that wall of dust hits, it reduces visibility. Again, drivers got to get off the side of the road before that comes in. So that is something we do not have to worry about or deal with here in this part of the country. Let me roll through this video too. This is what can happen. Flash flooding is really the biggest issue when it comes to these storms out into parts of the desert Southwest, anywhere from Colorado, California, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada also, all included with this. Let me see if I can maybe make this, I'll go full screen on this, make it bigger here. So take a look at this. The problem is that they go without a whole lot of rain, but then when it happens, they get a ton that just comes down all in one shot. 4 inches of rain in one shot, yeah, there's no area for that water to go. It's like the ground just liquefies into mud and everything just starts running. It's a scary sight, it really is. And you think about some of those main highways, a lot of times they get flooded under. And there's a situation there where it took out part of a bridge altogether. So quite a bit of an issue there. And this was a couple years ago, if I remember right. All right, there's Matt Gutman. This is ABC News coming out, kind of showing the scale of how large of a collapse that was. That highway, 27,000 cars in a day. It can't even go anywhere. And so you can see the power from these flash floods as they develop. We get a flash floods here, and it can be a problem. There's no doubt about it. But a flash flood out in the desert Southwest or even in mountainous areas, if you're down into a valley, can be a much, much bigger deal. And really a scary one if you don't know where you're at or where the water is at. A lot of times these areas, they don't even have any, there's really nothing there. There's not a river there at all. It's a desert, but they just call them washes. And then they fill up big time when the rains start to fall, and because that's where the water's got to go. That basically becomes the river when there is a lot of rain, but then it dries up when there's nothing there. So sometimes it's hard to tell where there might actually be a stream or river if things do become quite heavy. All right, let's go over to the questions. Any questions with the monsoon? Any questions with anything else that we've talked about? It's an open book. If there's ever a weather question that you've forgotten to ask, you'd always come back later and during any of these sessions and ask them at a later time. So we'll start off here. Courtney asking, can radar track the monsoon? You bet. They depend on radar the same way we would depend on radar here to track any of those showers and storms. The thing is that I talked about a lot of differences with these storms, how they're different here compared to how they're different out in, say, Arizona with the monsoon. One of the other differences is that a lot of times when you have high pressure not that far away, you have calmer weather. The wind speeds themselves are not very strong. The wind speeds aren't very strong aloft. They're not all that strong at the surface. Now, I'm not talking about dust storms. I'm not talking about severe windstorms. I'm just talking about the normal winds that push storms around. And with the winds not being that strong, these storms don't move usually very much. They kind of just move slightly, and then a lot of times as it starts to rain, the cool air kind of comes down, it hits the mountainside, and then the cool air just kind of drifts down the mountain, and then it leads to another storm popping up. So it's a little different in that a lot of these storms will develop and pop up, and then they'll start to fade away. New storms will pop up, they fade away, new storms pop up. It's not so much like here where we may see a line of storms coming at 45 miles per hour, and we can time it out, and we know how it's all going to roll through. Everybody seems to get the storms. Out there, it's very hit and miss, and things just kind of pop up as long as that heat and humidity is around, and then they fall apart. All right, let's go over to some of the other questions here. How do dust storms start? You know, some of the worst times for dust storms is actually in the very beginning part of the monsoon season, because they have gone months and months and months with either no rain or very, very little rain, depending on where they're at. And so the ground is incredibly dry. You could go and just kick the dirt, kick the sand, and you're going to see some dust kind of fly up a little bit. So depending on where you're at, and there's some areas that are really dusty and dry and are a big problem for dust storms, and there's some areas that are a little more mountainous and that type of thing, and it isn't as big of a deal. But when these storms end up developing, they push out cool air and they push out a little bit of wind. If that wind is strong enough, it's going to easily, even if the wind's not strong enough, it's going to pick up that dust, especially early on in monsoon season when it hasn't rained a whole lot to compact the soil down. And so as that storm gets going, if it does produce some stronger winds, which many storms do, 30, 40, 50 miles per hour, I can pick up that dust, and then it just kind of gets rolling all out ahead of that storm. So we get the winds from the storms here. We just don't ever see the dust and debris collect like that because it's too wet, and the ground, our dirt right now is mud. Out there, it's very dusty already. So that's a big difference there. All right, Donald asking, can you explain what the cloud cedars do in the mountains out west? I've heard of them, but don't understand what they're about. So basically what this is that for cloud cedars, if they go up, and again, the conditions have got to be right already. If they go up on a really dry day, it's typically not going to have a whole lot of success. But if you go up and there's already, you've got some clouds, you've got some humidity to work with, what it's basically doing is it's taking that environment and it is helping to lead to that condensation, leading to some rainfall. It's kind of speeding up the process by doing that. And it can trigger some rainfall and get it going. So sometimes this isn't done. It isn't done all that often, but it can be done in certain areas to try to generate some rain to get it going. But you're still dependent on some of the atmospheric conditions that are at hand also. How long does a dust storm last? A good question. A lot of times they last as long as the storm is able to help produce that wind. But even when the wind is gone, that dust just kind of slowly lingers and slowly falls apart. So instead of a big dust storm rolling your way, it's just kind of a cloud of dust that just kind of gradually settles back down to the ground. So it does take time. They've had some big ones that have started out there, and they've rolled through a big chunk of the state out in Arizona. I think it was 2 years ago now that they had late June, early July. They just had a series of these storms that were just kicking off these big dust storms one after another and shutting down highways. I mean, it was pretty bad stuff. And some of these went more than an hour or two, just kind of rolling through a good chunk of the state. We're talking mainly the southern and the central part of the state, but let's see here. According to asking, can a flash flood wash away a car? Absolutely. There's a ton of power in that water, a ton of power. So yeah, it's not advised at all to try to drive through that. I mean, even here, it's never advised to drive through flooded areas, but around here, you might lose your car because it stalls out. Out there, not only are you going to lose your car, but it's who knows where it's going to end up. And if you're in it, which you would be if you're driving it, you would be going along with the ride too. So that is by far the biggest danger for them. It's not tornadoes, it's not hailstones, it's not even dust storms or the intense lightning. It's definitely the flash flooding. Let's see. Jennifer asking, do flash floods in Arizona lift up houses from the Arizona because of the Arizona monsoon? It's I don't know how it is. It's not necessarily lifting it up, but seeing a couple of these flash floods, the best way to describe it is that during the worst of a flash flood, it's kind of a scary deal because it almost looks like the ground itself has turned into a very soupy mud, and the whole ground almost looks like it's liquefied. And in that situation, and you get a lot of flood waters that come down, it can do a lot of damage. I don't think we looked at a full house in that video that was floating away. I think it was a larger structure, but I don't think it was a full house. But the power of the water it isn't necessarily ripping up the foundation from the bottom, but it's just kind of pushing it and making it unstable with the water rising, a lot of force behind it that can sweep out cars and take other small buildings and so forth. Let's see. Cassandra asking, can a lot of water lift up houses? Okay, so kind of the same question it looks like here, but not necessarily lift them up like a tornado would lift them up, but definitely kind of cause a lot of damage and more kind of from the side, how that water is rushing into the house and do a lot of damage that way. Cassandra asking, can a dust storm cause a fire? Oh, that's a good one there too. Again, I would say towards the early part of monsoon season, when things are still fairly dry and they haven't had a whole lot of rainfall, I wouldn't say a dust storm itself is going to necessarily cause the fire, but you can have a couple things kind of work together to cause fires or spread fires. One being potentially a dust storm or the wind that's already there, especially if the fire is already going. The other sometimes can be lightning. Now, again, a lot of the lightning that's happening might be with the rainfall, and that helps to lower the risk of a wildfire. But in the early part of monsoon season, or if it's a really dry monsoon season where they don't have a whole lot of these showers and storms popping up, it can be a problem in spots. There's no doubt about it. All right, looks like that's it on the questions for today, so we'll leave it there. Of course, if you've got more questions, you can always come back tomorrow, and we'll do this again. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about mountain weather, and it definitely, some of what I talked about with the monsoon and the air kind of being forced into the mountain and causing some of those clouds to form definitely applies to tomorrow also. But yeah, we're going to be talking about all of that, on how mountain weather works, why sometimes we get UFO-shaped clouds around mountains, which is kind of a cool thing. And we'll also talk about why there's so much more rain and snow, especially snow. Why do skiers like to go to the mountains? There's a lot of snow there, and it's a certain type of snow. So we'll talk all about that coming up for tomorrow. Thanks for watching.